So beginning Beekeeper class week 5, this week we will be talking about everything that has to do with products of the hive. This is the fun time when we get to see what the fruits of our labors are and the fruits of the bee labors are and see all the different products we produce out of the hive. Excuse me. This is where it's going to differ for each person. You have to decide yourself what your goal is for keeping bees. Some people just keep them for the pure fact of the enjoyment of watching them. They may be keeping them for crop production, so they really don't get to see the products of the hive. But there's probably more products that you guys don't even realize that the hive can produce where you can actually make money from. So we're going to break these down tonight, go through them, and then we'll go through one by one how each one's harvested and how to make a little bit of money back. So there's very many products that come from the beehive. Obviously, the first thing people think of is honey. So the honey can come in the liquid form, or you can have comb honey. Both of those are probably the two #1 production things that come out of the hive. Beeswax, people typically don't think about this, but if you're going to be collecting honey, you're probably going to have a little bit of beeswax produced on the side that you can harvest too. Some people throw this away, but it's a valuable source that people do like to have. The one thing people don't realize they are producing one way or another is the bees themselves. We'll talk about the value of the bees, whether you're selling packages of bees or nukes or even queens right now are a hot commodity. This year, from the way it sounds, we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but it sounds like you better be getting on a list pretty quick if you're wanting to purchase bees, because they are getting harder to get. The producers I've been talking to are starting to fill up their orders. They don't know how many more they're going to be able to get. But we'll talk about some of that here coming up and ways of getting them. Pollen is another product you can produce from the hive that's in demand. The Propolis and Mead. You can take the honey and make mead, and that's another product. Royal jelly is one that people don't think much about, but it's also a product. And then bee venom itself is starting to become more popular, especially in the medical field, and we'll touch on that a little bit. So we'll start with the #1 is the honey itself. So it's the premier product of the hive, and you want to make sure that the honey is safe from fermentation. And the way you're going to decide if it's safe is if it's 18.6% or lower. So roughly anytime you look at a frame of honey, 2/3 of that honey needs to be capped. The bees are going to cap that honey off with a wax layer to completely seal the honey inside each cell. They don't seal that honey up until that moisture has dropped to below that 18.6%. That's Mother Nature way of telling you that that honey is at the percentage of moisture that it will keep forever. As humans, we have to use a refractometer to test it, and that in itself is kind of a science to learn how to use one of those. So if the high moisture can be lowered with fans, heaters, dehumidifiers before the honey's extracted, if you have a fan on it for a couple days. But to me, the best way is let Mother Nature take its course. The bees will actually fan their wings to bring more air through that hive, and they will lower the moisture itself. So I tell people just give the bees a few more days or weeks to let them cap that honey off, and then you know for sure that it's going to keep. So first of all, you have to remove the honey from the colonies. This is removing your supers. You've got to pick a time that works good for you, but it works best if you have a nice sunny afternoon while most of your bees are out flying and foraging. You're usually going to want to suit up and probably have your gloves on, because when you start taking the honey away from those bees, they're going to get protective of it, and they want to let you know that it's their honey and not yours. So by doing it in the afternoon on a nice sunny day, you'll have about half bees to deal with as you would have otherwise. And the temperament of the bees is usually better on a nice sunny day versus a cloudy day. You want to have all your tools set up and ready to go. That includes a smoker, your hive tool, any fumigant and fume boards you might be using, or a blower. We'll talk about those in detail here in a little bit. A bee brush, maybe some extra covers. when you remove the supers. But have all that equipment ready to go, because one thing about extraction is a lot of it is planning ahead of time to make it go smoothly once you get started. So first of all, we got to get the bees away from the supers so that you can take those supers off without dealing with a bunch of bees. A couple different ways they do is you'll go out a day or so ahead and put these escape boards on. And basically, these are one-way funnels that let the bees out, but they can't get back in. So you would place this between the deeps and the supers a couple days in advance, probably about 24 hours in advance. And all the bees that are in the supers, when they go out to get more honey, they'll have to come up through like this hole here and go out these funnels to get out, but they have trouble getting back in. It's kind of like a minnow trap. These are the same way. They have one-way little things on there, guides that let them out but doesn't let them back in. This is one way of doing it. I don't prefer this way because you have to get into the hive a couple days in advance, and you have to mess with the bees and lift off the supers and put them back on. It's a lot more planning ahead and detailed work, but it is one way of removing the bees. One of the ways I prefer is a fume board. This is basically like a outer cover, if you will, and it'll have either a felt or a cloth inner lining that you spray with some sort of a fumigant. I usually use Honey Bandit. There's several different products out there. It's a type of a smell that the bees do not like. It doesn't smell too bad as to a person, but the bees do not like the smell of it. So you will spray that inner board, and sometimes they even have like a solar panel on top that kind of heats it up and lets the fumes go down a little quicker. It doesn't take a lot of this because you can actually drive most of the bees out of the hive completely if you get too much of that product on there. And that's not what your goal is. You just want to get them out of the supers down into the deeps. So you spray that on there, leave it on for about 5 or 10 minutes, and you'll have most of the bees out of that supers, and you're able to lift them off and not have to deal with a lot of the bees. So if you do use any smoke, use the smoke sparingly. You can actually use it too much and cause your honey to get a little bit of a smoke flavor. That's not really what you're wanting to do. So I hardly ever use smoke at all when I'm trying to extract the honey. You know, here's a picture of a guy probably using a little bit more than he needs to. But if you put that fume board right on top, it's going to drive these bees down into these deep boxes, and you're going to be able to lift the super off with no problem. If you don't have any of those methods and you only have 1 or 2 boxes to deal with, 1 or 2 supers, you can actually pick out each frame one by one. Use your bee brush, brush off the bees, and then put this frame into like a tote, a Rubbermaid container or something, put the lid on it, grab the next frame, brush all the bees off, put it in the tote, cover it up, and do that one by one until you have all your frames removed. It's a slower process. It's a lot cheaper. It doesn't cost much to do it that way. When I first started, that's how I did it. It's a method that works very good. It's just a little more time consuming. You got to be in the hive a little bit longer, but it's very easy and doable. There's the bee brush. One other way, and I have used this several times, even when I use the fume board, you're still going to have a few stragglers left that want to hide up in those in the frames. You can take a leaf blower and turn the hive up on its side and literally blow the bees out of between the frames. Several people have used that. It works very well. Just be careful because some of these leaf blowers are powerful enough that you can push your frames completely out of this box and fall on the ground and be a mess. So, but that is one way that works very well. So removing the honey from the colonies, you want to make sure that what we talked about earlier, that at least 2/3 of this frame has capped honey. It's very easy to tell because these white caps are going to be very fresh. They're going to be nice, bright white. You can see the outer edge of this frame. Oops, sorry, back up here. The outer edge of this frame hasn't been quite capped, but there's enough honey in there. When you take it all out, it's going to be just fine, and it'll keep with no problem. So you can see this top one up here is completely capped off. So yes, that's one that's definitely going to work. This one here is completely capped off, no problem at all. And this one down here is about 50%. So this is one that, unless all your other frames are capped off and you just have one of these, that's not an issue. But if all your frames look like this, then you probably need to give them another week or so to get them capped off. Unless you've got some way of putting fans on those or dehumidifier to get the moisture out of there, and then use a refractometer to test that content of the moisture. Otherwise, I would wait till it looked like this. Another thing I wanted to point out is if you look at this frame right here, you can see where they've built the comb out and away from the frame. So we'll be talking about taking the caps off in a little bit, but it's very important that this comb sticks out past that wood. It makes cutting the caps off a lot easier. So it goes back to when we talked about when we talked in week 2 about putting our hive boxes together. When you add your supers, make sure you only have 9 frames in your super and not 10 frames. And then you space those 9 frames out evenly. That allows the bees to build out the comb out past the wood frames and makes it easier to cut off. If you do put 10 frames in there, it makes it a lot harder. You'll have to use a scratcher. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Believe me, the people that have done that only do it once because it creates a lot more work for you. So here you can see this is the frame turned on its side, and this is what they call, this is probably a hot knife, could be a cold knife. A hot knife and cold knife, the only difference is a hot knife you plug in, it heats up the temperature, and it just basically cuts or melts the tops of these caps off and opens up the cells to that honey. But you use the top and bottom board as a guide as you're going down, as your depth guide of how much of this cap to cut off. So if you'd put 10 frames in there and that honey wasn't sticking, that comb wasn't sticking out past these wood, your knife would never touch those caps. You'd have to go in there by hand and scratch all those cells open, and it's a lot more work. Here's a nice picture of looks like a hot knife that's peeled down, and here's all the caps falling off. So hot knife or cold knife, that's personal preference. I've used both. Honestly, what I like to use is a serrated bread knife. I think that works just about as good as anything. You have to be careful with a hot knife. Processed honey from your big companies, they will heat up the honey to make it be able to go through the pipes and bottle it. And anytime you heat up honey, you're going to start breaking it down, and it's not going to taste as rich as it would if it was just left natural. So with a hot knife, you're not going to be on the honey long enough other than just to take the caps off. But if you set your knife down inside the decapping tank, it may start heating some of that honey up. So be careful with that. But hot or cold, that's personal preference. And like I said, I actually like a serrated bread knife that works about as good for me. So here's a nice picture of them going down the frame, taking the caps off. This is the wax tops coming off. They're going to fall down in the decapping tank. You're going to save this. This is where your wax is going to come from for later on. And that's why you've got a decapping tank here. And that decapping tank has a screen at the bottom. So those caps fall off, and any honey that was left on them is going to drip down through that screen and come out this honey gate when it separates. Usually if you leave that there within 3 or 4 hours, it's going to separate. This decapping tank comes with a lid. I usually put it on overnight, let all the honey drip down off the cappings, and by next morning, all the caps are clean, and you've got a nice bunch of honey to usually get an extra gallon out of that, just more than you would have otherwise. So, but you have to open these cells up one way or another in order to get that honey exposed so it'll come out of the comb. So just talked about collecting the caps in the capping tank. So here's a nice picture. This is the screen down here that catches the comb or the caps and lets the honey drip down below. There's a board across this that you can set your frame on. And what you can't see in this picture is there's actually usually a screw or a nail that's pointed upwards. And you can set this frame on there so it don't slide off this wood, and then spin it on that screw to do both sides. You'll have to cut off both sides of that frame, or the caps off both sides of that frame to open up the cells. So other choices you have, we talked about, if your knife doesn't, if your comb's not thick enough that you can't use a knife, this is what they call a scratcher. And you actually go through by hand and take this little tool and scratch off all these caps. It's a lot more work, but it will open up those cells. You can also use a roller. This is a special bee product that they use that's got little tiny fingers that stick out, and all they do is just poke holes into the comb, pokes holes in those caps and opens up those cells so that honey can come out. Another way, I have not used this, some people like it, is a heat gun. The downside to this heat gun is what it does is actually melts off the caps to open up the cells. The bad thing about this is if you want any wax to sell or to make candles, you're not going to get any wax off of this because it's going to stick to the side of the cells and it's not going to fall down like if you cut it off. But a heat gun will work. Some of the new things they're coming out with are the planers. You can get planers hot or cold. It's kind of the same thing as a knife, but it actually just kind of has one solid blade, and you just pull it down there. The hot one here shows it cutting off. I've not used these. They got new ones now that are just cold planes, that kind of like a combination of a knife and a scratcher both, but it opens up the caps as well. The one thing I do like, I've used this one. This is a uncapping roller. It's made by Simple Harmony Farms. You have to order them online. These are fast. All you do is push your frame down through this and pull it back up, and these little tiny stainless steel blades slice open all those caps. So it's down and up and you're done. The nice thing about it is it's very fast, it's very easy. The bad thing about it is that once again, you don't have any wax to harvest. The other downside to this is it's about a $400 product just for this little plastic piece and 2 rollers. So it's expensive, but if you've got a lot of supers to take off and you're not worried about wax, this is a fast way to get those cappings off of there. And then the high-tech guys that do lots of them, they have everything automated. Just throw this out there so you can see it. These are commercial chain decappers. The frame goes down in there, and these chains actually spin and rotate, and they go up against the frame in a circular motion and slice open the caps. They do get a little bit of wax out of this, but it's more for just speed, so they don't have to do it all by hand. Most of this is automated. So now we have the caps off of the honey, and we have exposed the cells, so the honey's going to be able to come out. So the only way to get that honey out and get it done relatively fast is to put it in an extractor and spin it. So these extractors come in a lot of different variations. I have seen some made that will hold 2 frames at a time, made out of 5-gallon buckets, and they'll put a cordless drill on here and it spins the honey around, and it works very good. If you've only got 1 or 2 hives, this might be a solution for you, that are a cheap way of doing it. This one here is probably a 3 or 4 frame at a time. This one here looks like it does probably 15, 16 at a time. They make these all the way up to 50, 60 frames at a time, the big commercial ones. So you can get a hand crank, you can get one with a motor. But what this does, here's one with a motor. It spins this really fast and it throws that honey out to the sides. The one I use is very similar to this hand crank one here. The club has one just about like this. Depending on if you've got a deep frame like this one here, or the shallow frames of the shorter ones, they may be placed differently inside this. The deep frames usually go from center to outside, and the shallow frames, sometimes you can put 2 across here and do twice as many. You can do twice as many shallows as you can deep frames. But either way, it spins this out. I got a good picture here. This is the one in motion, and you can actually see all the honey right here being slung to the side of this extractor. Then it's going to fall down to the bottom. One of the keys to extracting is, let me back up here. This is the honey gate where the honey's going to come out of. And if you don't open this up after a while, your honey's going to start building up and get higher up in the tank. If it gets as high as this rack and you start spinning that rack and that honey, you're going to whip your honey and put a lot of air in it and make it real frothy, which you do not want because it's really hard to get air out of honey. So I like to keep that open so it's constantly dripping. And as you sling the honey out, you don't have to worry about it building up and getting too high. You'll know pretty quick if your metal basket is hitting the honey because it'll be harder to crank. So here's the honey gates opened out of the extractor. The honey's dripping down. And this is a wire mesh that has 2 different screens in it. It filters the honey to take any sort of bug part or bee parts out of it. Maybe a little bit of wax was left in there. And then it's going to go into your bucket. So once the bucket's full, then you can bottle directly out of the bucket after it's been filtered. Some people like to filter their honey a couple different times. It just depends on how pure and clean you want it. Some people will actually bottle the honey right out of this and call it raw honey. It might have bee wings and bee legs in it, but that's just part of it. I guess it's higher protein, but that's up to you. This is a picture of them bottling it. This is a nice picture of the honey gate, where you can shut that down real easy to once your bottle's filled. It's nice to let it come out nice and slow so you don't get those bubbles build up in there. Here's what happens if you bottle it too quick or if you whip it, you get all these bubbles. Regardless of what you do, you're going to get some bubbles in your honey. If you let this jar set out for about an hour or so, a lot of these will come to the top and you can actually scrape some of these off and open them up so the air comes out. The only thing it really hurts is just the sellability of it. The more pure it looks like without the air bubbles, they like it better. It can cause a little bit of crystallization more if it's got more bubbles, but if you let that set, it shouldn't be a problem. Anything? Okay.
No, they think you're crazy.
So Rose is here in the back giving me directions. So now, as far as you selling your honey, since it is a pure product, you don't have to have, in Iowa, you do not have to have any special kitchen area or certified kitchen through the Department of Ag. It's a pure product, so you're good to go. But what you do have to have is a label, and you have to have certain things on your label. You have to have the name and complete address of the manufacturer, which is going to be you. You have to have the product name, which is just honey. You have to list the ingredients in order of predominance by weight, which in your case is just going to be honey. And you have to write down the volume or weight of the product. So if you're selling 1 pound jars or 2 pound jars or a gallon, it needs to say that on the label. So here was an example of one of my labels, and I purposely put this on here because on this label there's something missing. Does anybody see what's missing on this? This is where I test to see how many of you are sleeping. Yep.
What else? Something more.
I don't have an address yet. I don't have the full address, correct? And there's something else I need. Yep, the weight or the volume. So for this to be legitimate, I'd have to have my full street address on here, and I'd have to say whether it's a 1 pound, 5 gallon, whatsoever. But that would have to be on that label. Once that's on there, everything's good to go. I can now sell my product wherever I want and be perfectly legal. There again, each state probably has different guidelines, but for Iowa, that is all I would have to have. Now, if I started getting into making creamed honey, flavored creamed honey, where I start adding ingredients, at that point, you have to have a certified kitchen. It has to be inspected through Department of Ag. So that changes everything. But just for honey itself and for comb honey, since it's a pure product, you do not have to have any other regulations involved, just the label. So I looked up, I can tell you guys, I hate to say it, but if you're new to beekeeping, everything's went up in price last year. So I looked up yesterday what the extracting kit would cost. It's went up about $50 from last year. So Man Lake has this kit right now for $675. That includes the decapping tank, a 5-gallon pail with a honey gate on it, a heated knife, a scratcher, and I think it's a 2-frame extractor with the honey gate on it with a manual turn crank. The good news for you guys, if you're part of our bee club, we have an annual extraction party here at East Lake Park in Osceola. You're allowed to bring in at least 2 deeps of honey unless you contact me ahead of time and we can work something out. If you got a, 5-6 deeps, that's fine, but we need to schedule that accordingly. We may even have a separate day, but we usually here start about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm usually here at about 9 o'clock at night. You can bring your honey in, and you bring a container to take your honey home in, and we will help you extract your honey. We have all the equipment here, so all you'd have to have is the buckets or whatever you need to take your honey home in, and a container for your wax cappings too. But we will walk you through this step, help you in every way. It's actually a good time. We all get together. Last year, I think I put up 30 gallons myself the day before, and we put up another probably 20 gallons with several people the next day. So we have 2 or 3 extractors we can use. We have a couple decapping tanks, so we can actually do 2 different people's at the same time and never mix the honey. So one nice thing about having a club that we get to use the equipment. So the next thing, unless you guys have any questions on liquid honey, we're going to move to comb honey. It's more of a specialized product. It takes a little bit more planning ahead. It's a little bit easier probably to harvest, but it takes a lot more planning ahead. It's not the easiest thing in the world to get the bees to do, but there are some tricks to do it. Couple things on comb honey, what you're trying to do is get the bees to build up their own wax, their own foundation. So you would not have any plastic foundation in the frame. You might do it this way where they have a starter strip of plastic foundation to give the bees kind of a pattern to start. They would fill this entirely full of comb and then fill the comb full of honey and seal it off. And then when you harvest it, you would cut off from here down, harvest your squares and leave this part because it's got the plastic in it. They make special molds you can put in supers to cause the bees to actually build their comb inside of squares. This is just one example of that as a side shot, how the bees would do that. Shows how they fill it in. This is a frame that does not have any foundation, and this is the comb honey they cut out of that frame. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but so what they would do is probably cut that about here and here and get their squares of comb. So they could probably have either used a starter strip, or more likely what they've done is instead of putting plastic foundation in that frame, they've purchased wax, pure wax foundation, and it kind of gives the bees a guide to start their pattern off of that. If you're only wanting to produce just a little bit of comb honey for yourself, maybe some friends, a real easy way of doing that is to go ahead and put your 9 frames in like you normally would, and then pull out maybe frame 3 and 7, pop the foundation out and just put the frame back in. By having a full frame with foundation on either side of it, you've kind of given the bees a pattern to start with, and they will fill that frame with comb themselves. I've done this, it works pretty well. My suggestion would be, if you're wanting to produce any comb honey at all, do it with your most aggressive, most powerful, most populated hive, because they're the ones that's going to be more active to fill it quick. If you have kind of a struggling colony that's not really advancing very quickly, probably not the colony that you want to look at for making comb honey, because it's going to take a lot of bees and workers to build that comb up. So it's something you're going to want to plan ahead of time and get started right away early in the year. So once that comb is full and capped off, you can take a kind of a cookie cutter they have. There's 3-inch and 4-inch ones. You just stamp out, cut out your pattern you need, and then you can put it in a little plastic box and you're ready to go to sell. So everything in that box is edible. It's basically wax and honey. Some people take bites of it and spit out the wax, but comb honey is, if you can find the right buyers, a very good commodity to sell. I've seen prices anywhere from $12 to $20 a box for comb honey. A lot of sellers sell out of comb honey long before they sell out of liquid honey, partly because it's harder to produce and they don't have as much of it in the beginning. So you can buy what they call Ross rounds. These are specially made. They've got a plastic ring around them inside of these containers. The bees have to go in there, fill this round container up with comb, and then once it's capped off, you can actually pop that ring out, put a lid and a bottom on it, and it's ready to go. This kit here costs you about $100 just for that one super alone. So it can get kind of costly. Here's an example of another kit that just as the frames comes with plastic foundation. The one thing you have to be careful of when you're using these thin wax foundation strips, if it gets hot out and they haven't started making comb on them, they can start sagging and bending, and then you got a real mess in there. So that's where you got to kind of keep an eye on it. But with the shallows, it's usually not too much of an issue. It's when you start getting into the mediums and the deeps with wax foundation. And then you've got these clamshell containers that just fold up over the squares after you cut them. But this kit's about the same price. So there's our kits out there that will help you with comb honey. But like I said, pop out the foundation on a couple frames in each one of your supers and you'll have comb honey. So now that we've cut the caps off, we have wax that has fell down on the decapping tank and the wire screen. This is what the wax is going to look like, the cappings before you do anything. This is beeswax after you've processed it. So when I say beeswax, this is what usually people think of, but this is actually what it's going to look like when you start the process. So when people come to the extraction party to harvest their honey, they're so excited about the honey, a lot of times they forget about the decappings and they don't even think about bringing a container to take them home in. It's kind of neat, especially your first year, to take your own wax home, maybe make a candle or something. But I wanted to go through real quick on how you do that yourself. It's not a hard process. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I can tell you the good and the bad and what I did right and wrong. So here are the cappings you've cut out. Maybe you had some extra comb that was no good that you got the honey out of, and some of it fell off the frames or whatever. But you're going to have some dead bees in it. That's just natural. The bees are going to go after there to get some of the honey. Some are going to die. Some are going to be dead from the extraction process itself, but you're going to end up with something like this. The easiest way is, you can see this wax still has honey on it. If you lay this out on a cookie sheet like this picture, or if you lay it on a piece of cardboard, set it outside, within about 24 to 48 hours, those bees from your hive are going to come back and they're going to clean every little drop of that honey off of that comb. And when it's done, it's going to be almost snow white. There's no way you're going to be able to do it any better than what the bees can. So I just let it set out for a day or so, make sure it's not going to rain that night, and you'll come back and it'll be just snow white, cleaned off, and you'll have nothing but pure wax. So then what you want to do, this is them showing them cleaning it off, is you're going to have to melt that wax down. Now there's a couple different ways. This is the old-fashioned solar method, where they basically built like a window box. They would let the sun heat up through the glass and it would melt the wax into a liquid form. If you're like me, I don't have quite that much time and patience, so I will use a crock pot. And I can tell you from experience that you want to use a plastic liner for your crock pot, or use the double broiler method. If you put the wax into water directly, you will melt the wax to the side of your crock pot and you will have to buy your wife a new crock pot. I've been there, done that. So the plastic method works really well. I put the water on the outside and just dump it directly in the crock pot. Put the plastic bag over that and the water down below it, and then put your wax directly in here. So you heat it up, and once that wax is pure liquid, then you can pick your plastic bag up, and it's easy to get out of there, and it's never touched the crock pot. With the double boiler, it's kind of the same method. You can use a pan inside a pan. Your wax is in here, the water is in here, it heats up, turns your wax to liquid. Once your wax is liquid, it is going to have still the dead bees, the chunks of stuff, pollen, things that went through the extractor and didn't get filtered out. So you're going to have this liquid, you're going to pick up your bag, and you're going to have to, this is before it got strained, and you're going to have to filter that. Now you can, as this picture here shows, you can put the cheesecloth down inside the bag first and then pick up the cheesecloth to filter out the honey or filter out the wax. Or what I like to do is take the liquid and pour it through cheesecloth, or actually what I think works the best for me is I will take a gallon jug, cut the bottom of it off, put the cheesecloth in the jug upside down, and you've got a funnel that you can pour your liquid wax through, screen out any of the thick stuff, the dead bees, and it'll run out the bottom of the lid of the jug into whatever container you wanted to or mold. And at that point, you can throw the cheesecloth and the gallon jug away because you don't have to worry about cleaning it up. Whatever this wax touches, it's going to stick to, and it's going to be really, really hard to get off. It can be pretty messy. So once you filter it, it goes directly into the molds. It can be simply just a Tupperware container, plastic Gladware, whatever, or you can get fancy and put it in one of these beeswax molds. Maybe you're going to put it directly into a candle mold, but that is 100% beeswax. Now, since that's 100% beeswax, you want to be careful at any time when you're heating it up because you can catch that on fire if you're not careful. But the candle making we'll talk about here in a little bit, but they make all sorts of molds. This just happens to be one that looks like a beehive. You can pour your wax into jars, let them set up and keep them for later, or you can use the candles. Here's this chunks of wax that they're going to keep for later on. The one thing nice about the wax is you can keep it for a long time. I like keeping a chunk of wax like this because if I use swarm traps, or if I have a new hive, or if I get new foundation, you can take this chunk of wax and it'll keep for a long time, and rub that on the side of the box that you're going to put the bees in, or rub it on your side of your swarm trap, rub it on your foundation, and that wax will help the bees to start building their comb. It kind of gives them a head start. Plus the smell and the aroma and everything will help them be more attracted to your bee traps. They'll be more content in their beehives. To me, it's just a good practice to have some of that around, especially on new equipment. If I build a bee trap, I take my bar of wax and I rub it on all the sides, on the insides of that. There are also people now using bee wax. They get a large, it's a lot of it, and they get it into a big container and melt it down until it's in the liquid form. And they're actually taking their new boxes, whether it's deep, shallows, or whatever, and instead of painting them, they're actually dipping the whole box in the beeswax to have a weather seal. That way they don't have to paint them. They've got the natural smell, plus they've got the sealing powers to keep it waterproof and everything. So that's another method I see people starting to use more beeswax on. Is I know I seen Jason Foley was using that too. He doesn't like to paint his hives, so he just builds them all together, and then one day goes outside and he's got a big vat that he heats it up, beeswax with so much water, and he just dips it in there and coats them all in one shot. So something to think about. Another product you can use for the beeswax is people make lip balm. We had one member here, I know, that she makes lip balm, and she makes ointments and stuff out of the wax. That's a whole process within itself, but that's just one of the products that can be used for the beeswax. Candles, these are simply just wax that was flat pressed into this shape, and they rolled them up to make candles and put a wick in the center. Like I said, you can get the wicks and put inside a molds and pour the liquid wax right into it to make the candles. The candle making is a whole nother thing within itself. There's a whole lot to learn about what type of wicks to use, some that burn quick, some that don't burn quick. But that's something else that your wax can be used for, or something you can keep for yourself, give out as gifts, or just make a little bit of money back from the beekeeping. Anything on wax production, Rose? Okay, we're going through this pretty quick. So the other product that people don't think about is selling bees. And right now, like I said earlier, bees, from my prediction, from what I've been seeing, it's going to be harder and harder to buy packages this year, and they're going to be higher in price. Typically, a 3-pound package of bees will sell for anywhere. I've seen them from, I'll say 120 to 150, with 135 being about average. It seems like this year they're going a little bit towards more of that 150 price. If you've got a hive that went through winter and it is doing very well, if you don't split that hive and sell some bees off, or make another split for yourself to keep, chances are they're going to swarm anyway on their own, because they're going to get too big too quick on population, and they're going to leave. So you can either take some of those bees and get money out of them, or you can watch your money fly away when they swarm. But chances are, one way or another, they're going to split whether you want them to or not, if you don't do it yourself. So with beekeeping, it's going to take some money to get into it, so you just as well get as much out of it. Like I said many times, I'm cheap. I'm always looking at ways to get a profit back on what I've spent. I looked at my hives this week. I've got 15 hives right now that all have bees in them that are looking good. I would say out of the 15, 14 of them, I could split 2 or 3 ways easily if I wanted to and sell bees. That's how strong they are. And if I don't do anything, I know they're going to swarm on me anyway. So I just as well cash in and either make some nukes or sell some packaged bees and get some of that money back. So we talked about nukes last week. I've seen prices, usually they're around 170, 175. This year, if you can get them, I've seen 5-frame nukes sell anywhere from $170 to $200. Be careful of nukes. I like nukes. They're a good way to start. The problem is, even with packaged bees or nukes, people that will take their extra bees and then they go buy a queen that probably came from California, more likely, or Florida, and they'll stick in there. Now, in 30 days, when you start having young bees hatch out of there, 50% of those genetics are coming from the California strain or wherever, and may not have the hardiness that they should have for Iowa winters. That's where I strongly recommend you looking for producers that not only are going to sell you the bees that came from Iowa, but probably the queens have survived Iowa as well. I think that's a good key point to look for when buying bees, is to find out where those genetics are coming from. Are they importing the queens from somewhere? That's information you should ask. Like I said, I like to see them that they came from Iowa. So if you've got bees existing, what you can do is just do a split, pull some frames that have fresh eggs, stick them in a nuke, and then just start dumping as many bees as you can get in there, and then move that nuke away from that original colony. They're going to realize there's no queen in there. The only trick to this is when you pull the bees out, making sure that you don't pull the queen out from the original hive. Because if you're going to sell these nukes, you want no queen in here at all, and you want to move this away to a different location, make these bees think they're queenless, and then they will make, in about 26, 28 days, they will make a new queen, and she'll hatch and start laying eggs. You can do a speedier method where you can buy the queen and put in this box of bees you got with frames and then sell that as a nuke. But like I said, if you're cheap like me, you're going to make your own queen or make the bees make their own queen. And that's the way to do it, is to get some fresh eggs and larvae, stick in there, make those bees think that they're queenless, and then they'll start feeding royal jelly to a couple of those eggs and larvae and start producing their own queen. So another thing, if you're really talented and have a lot of patience, you can start making queens for sale. I hats off to like Jason Foley and Ellen Bell that do the grafting and raise queens. There's a lot of science, a lot of time. It's a process that takes about 30 days. And once you start day one, you got to keep track of everything you do each day to make sure that process doesn't get altered or changed, because there's a strict guideline you have to follow. I don't have the patience to do that. But that's a way that you can also make some money in bee business. Queens right now are selling anywhere from $35 to $45. But she is probably one of the most important parts of your whole colony. So making sure you have a good quality queen is more important than anything else. But just want to show you some of the different avenues of process you can make money off of in a hive. The pollen traps. Basically, this is something you would add to the hive. You add it to the entrance. Basically, what it does is when the bees are coming in, they've got pollen on their legs and stuff. They have to crawl through kind of a maze to get into the hive. And when they do that, the pollen falls off in the box down below, and then you get to harvest that pollen. People use this for allergies. It is a very high demand for this. A lot of pharmaceutical companies are even looking for people that sell pollens or some of their medicines and stuff. The one thing about pollen traps is you typically don't leave these on for about a day or so and then take it off and move to another hive. If you leave it more than a day or two, then you start depleting the hive itself from the pollen that they need. So plus it makes it harder for them to get in and out of, and they don't like it. So it's good to leave it on there for about a day. Propolis, this is the sticky substance that the bees like to glue everything down. We talked about earlier what it was made from. It's basically what we call bee glue. It's a resinous mixture the honeybees produce by mixing the saliva and the beeswax that they gather from tree buds, sap, and any other thing from any other plants. But it looks like a queen excluder, but the holes sizes are different, and it's small enough that the bees think they need to seal it off. So they start sealing all these holes with propolis. And then what you would do is you would take this, put it in the freezer for a couple days and twist it, and that would all break off, and you'd harvest propolis that way. It gets used in chewing gum, car wax, medical purposes. So there you'd have to have a specialized outlet to be able to sell this, but just wanting people to know that that is a product of a hive, again, that you can use. As a beekeeper, you'll probably learn to love and hate propolis. It's a great thing in the wintertime when they seal up their hive, because they seal up all the air that could come through the sides or whatever. But when it comes time to take off the outer and inner cover every time, you're going to learn real fast what propolis is, because they will glue it down. The nice thing about propolis, and that's why the medical fields want it, is it's an antibacterial agent. So it's kind of the bees' method of, they will line the sides of the hive and stuff with this so that they can kill any bacteria that gets in there. Dan said rub propolis on your swarm trap. That's a good idea too, because that's another attractant that the bees will be looking for. So another product that you can get from honey or from the hive itself, is mead, which is made from the honey. It's kind of the same process as beer making or whiskey making. It's a long process where you actually use fermented honey. So people that have honey that goes bad, say your hive died out this winter and you've got a lot of honey that maybe it wasn't quite capped off the way it should be, but pretty close, but you don't think it's going to keep. If you've ever smelled fermented honey, you'll never forget the smell of it. It kind of has that silage smell because of the fermentation process, but it can still be used for mead making. People add different flavors to mead. I don't go into the details of making it because there's a lot of different ways to do it, and there's good and bad ways. That there's always a set of fine line in alcohol making between good and deadly. So I'll leave that up to you guys to do more research on if you're interested on the mead. But it basically is all it is honey wine. And like I said, with the different flavors and the different makes of it, I can tell you there's good mead and there's bad mead. There's a lot of different types of the flavors, and I've had both. Royal jelly, I always get a kick out of this. We all know royal jelly is what is fed to the queens to develop her into the queen. That is the difference between if she's going to be a worker or a queen, is the royal jelly that she's fed at a young age. And you can go to about any health and beauty place and you can find products that claim to be royal jelly. First of all, I'd like to know how they harvest enough royal jelly to make these products. But it's been sold in both dietary supplements and alternative medicines. I did a little digging, and so far the European Food Safety Authority and the United States Food and Drug Administration have concluded that there's no current evidence to support the claim of health benefits of royal jelly. So you see all these shampoos and everything that advertise royal jelly is probably just a marketing scam, but I guess if you can sell it, more power to you. So kind of an interesting byproduct of the hive that most people don't think about. When we think about bee venom, it's usually a bad scenario because we probably got stung and we were on the bad side of it. But the interesting thing about bee venom is it's been used in ancient times to treat arthritis, rheumatism, back pain, skin disease, a lot of different things. It's a rich source of enzymes. There's at least 18 active components in the venom which have some pharmaceutical properties. There's actually been research showing that bee venom has been used in medical treatments such as cancer and showing very promising results on. So I don't know how much of it's coming from honeybee venom. I know they've done a lot of research on some of the venom that's coming out of South America, on some of the different wasps and stuff down there. I think as time goes by, we'll probably see more of this. I can tell you from a personal standpoint, I've witnessed this with back pain issues. I've had 3 back surgeries, and before I had those, when I got stung, my back pain would subside for about a week. I was actually going out and intentionally getting stung just to relieve some of the back pain. And I asked my doctor about that, and he said, what's happening is your body's releasing endorphins to compensate being stung, so it's taking the pain away. And he said, yeah, there is some medical reasoning behind that. It's not a long-term fix, but it does get rid of the pain. But I think as time goes by, we're probably going to see more and more research done on this. So that covers chapter 6, and we're going to cover chapter 7 tonight too, which some of this will be kind of a review from last week. So for those that didn't see last week, what we're going to do is talk about some of the things you're going to do throughout the year, but mainly it's just to reinsure and show you more slides of what you're looking for and what you're looking at when you do your hive inspections. So we'll go through a few slides here and talk about that. One of the biggest questions I get is how often should you inspect your hives? This is different for everybody. It's different from a novice versus more of an experienced beekeeper. Probably the golden rule. It just depends on what you're doing, how much time you have. I would say anywhere from a week or 2 is probably good if you're new to it, especially. But the bottom line is you need to know what's going on in there. Some people can walk by their hives, look at it, see bees are going in and out, and have a pretty good idea of the population without even opening up their hive. and that's an inspection that they can walk away and feel confident their hives are healthy. The next person probably has to go over there, open up the hive and look at it to really understand what's going on. So a lot of this comes with experience, but bottom line is you need to be one step ahead of the bees, because if they think they're too crowded, they're going to swarm. If there's starting to be some sickness, it's probably going to happen quicker than what you can take care of, unless you know about it right off the bat. So especially swarm prevention, if they get crowded, you need to start adding supers or split them, because if they split, they're going to take off and you just lost part of your bees. So 10 days may be good for a rule of thumb. I'd say anywhere a week, 2 weeks. A lot of times I'll put my supers on in the spring. I can, when I'm mowing the yard, I can drive by, look to see if the bees are going in and out. I may not check that hive for a month to actually get in there and look at it, because I pretty well know what's going on when I can look at them just driving by. So question, what should you look for each time you open them up? You're going to look for the sign of the queen, or a lack thereof a queen. One of the biggest fears I hear people talk about when they're new to beekeeping is trying to find a queen inside of a box with 70,000 bees that look almost like her. Don't panic. You don't have to be a master of finding queens. In fact, you may not ever even see a queen for the first year or two of beekeeping. If you open that box and you see eggs, that queen was there within 24 hours. You don't have to worry about whether she's there right now or not. As time gets by and you get more practice, you will get better at looking for queens. So don't feel like you need to be a queen expert right off the bat.
It's actually bad to look for her, because if you squish that queen, then you have more problems.
Yeah. And then what Rose just said, if you couldn't hear, was some people get so concerned over trying to find the queen that they start digging through all the frames, they start lifting the frames out, and chances are they're probably going to do more harm, because they got more of a chance of what they call rolling the queen, which may be squishing her or knocking her off the frame into the grass, or upsetting her where she wants to leave, or damaging her wings or something, and causing her not to be as successful as she could be. So sometimes less is better. So don't get too concerned about actually seeing that queen, especially every time you go in there. There's some hives I probably never have seen my queen at all. And there's other times that for some reason it seems like they're real easy to find. So other things to look for, symptoms of maybe pests, parasites, diseases. This is next week's class. This is what we're going to discuss in detail. Basically, for the first 5 weeks, we build you up and tell you how exciting bee raising is. And then the last week, we give you all the nightmares and scare you with all the things that could happen and how your bees can die. To kind of set you back into reality a little bit. But this is some of the things you're going to be looking for, and we'll talk about those next week. Signs of overcrowding. Do you need to super? Maybe they're getting low on food. Just maybe you need to start feeding them. So basically what you're looking for in one sentence is to get a good feel of the general health, the strength, and the vigor of the colony. If you got a nice strong box of bees and you got plenty of room for them, and they're bringing food in and she's laying eggs, you're good to go. You know, if we all opened up our boxes and we saw bees that were this thick, we'd think we had everything that we needed. Making sure they had plenty of room, we'd be good to go. So your goal is to increase your population without overcrowding. It's for the ultimate honey production. So it's a very, very strong balancing act of having as many bees as you possibly can without overcrowding them. So this is the same picture I think we showed from last week when Rose took off one of the supers in the fall. She had so many bees that they couldn't all get back into the hive that she had to do a split on this box. But this is definitely overcrowding. This population here knew how to reproduce and do it very quickly and very successfully. I think this is the same picture, but
that was a different hive.
Okay, this is a different hive, she said, but there again, it shows you how full that box is, that if this, was in midsummer, you definitely want to start adding supers. So these next few slides, we're kind of going to do like we did last week. I want you guys to to text in here or raise your hand, but tell me what you see is going on in this slide. And tell me what you do with this slide. I know what I would do with it. You got your hand up? Yeah.
No.
So, says you did. Okay. So what I see in this slide, I don't see anybody answering yet, but what I see in this slide is a couple different things. It's kind of hard to tell on all these empty cells out here if they're truly empty, if there's eggs in there. But the thing that really stands out is you have a lot of queen cells here being built. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 queen cells. Looks like there's a drone cell right here that's, it's sticking out just a little bit. That's a drone cell. You've got some larvae in here, some young eggs. The one thing I don't understand on this frame is why there's not more brood around here, why there's just all these queen cells. That's kind of a strange thing, but this tells me that for some reason, it doesn't look like on this frame here that they're overcrowded by any means, but they're getting ready to swarm and take off. Maybe there's some sickness going on. They don't like it there for some reason, but they're getting ready to swarm. Yeah, and I would say like Rose said here, this is probably some aged comb. It looks dark. But regardless, when you've got this many swarm cells, either maybe they've already swarmed and that's why there's not as many bees here, but you're going to have to either pinch these off and what I would do is I would pull this frame out and I would pinch off maybe all but this one the biggest queen cell, maybe this one here, or perhaps this one, pinch all the rest of them off and leave the biggest one, put that in a nuke, put some extra frame and add some bees to it. And now you just started a colony and that queen is going to hatch here. And then in about, probably 18 days after she hatches, you're going to start having a queen that's going to go out. She's going to do her maiden flight to get mated, bred back. When she comes back in, she'll start laying eggs. So that's a quick, easy way right there to start a nuke and start a whole new colony. But I would say from looks of this picture, they probably are already swarmed on you. So what do you see in this picture? This is probably something you don't want to see if you open up your hive. Yep, possibly chalk brood. One person wrote not much, looks like trouble. Yep, I'd agree. You don't see hardly any brood in there. What you're seeing is larvae that's not capped off. There's no cap brood in here. There's no food supply in here. There's no honey on the edges. Very few bees. Something dramatically not going right here. Where you've got larvae, so your queen's probably been here a week ago or so, but I don't see hardly any eggs. Kind of makes me wonder if they didn't already swarm. But with the low population and the scattered brood, you definitely have something going on here. Sometimes it's hard to tell with just one frame to see exactly what's going on, but with one frame, there's something going on that you need to take a closer look at. So that's the whole point of this, is that one frame may not tell you everything, but it tells you need to look at least deeper. So this is one slide I really, really like because it shows you possibly everything in one picture. We start here with the youngest D. You've got an egg right here. The nice thing about this is you have one egg. It's in the middle of the cell, kind of sticking up. This is what you want to see. If you see this, you've got a queen in that cell or in that box. and she's been here within 24 hours. So I'm not worried about trying to find that queen. I know she's been in here. And then you look and you've got more brood here that's larvae. So you got a lot of larvae here. And then you move up to cap brood. I don't see a lot of cap brood. Most of this is drone cells. If you look, the reason I know these are drone cells, these are going to be male, is these are sticking out above the cells. If this was a female worker, it would be a flat cap right here. It'd be smooth from side to side. This bubbles out, so that's going to be a male drone. And then I see these queen cells. So, and these are at the bottom of the frame. So they're probably swarm cells. And typically when they have swarm cells, you're going to see a lot of drone cells because they want males. They're going to be able to breed to that queen. So this is another sign of a hive that's going to get ready to swarm. You don't see a lot of bees on here, but there again, you're just looking at the bottom of one frame, so it's hard to tell. But you've got a lot of different things here on this frame to look at. But here again, this would be an ideal frame to pull off and stick in a nuke and start a new colony. Maybe pinch this queen cell off, let this big healthy one be the number one. If you pulled this off, stuck it in a nuke box, and didn't kill either queen cell, typically what would happen is one of two things. This one would hatch probably first. She would come out. She'd probably be the top queen. And then a day or two later, this queen's going to hatch. And she's either going to fight to the death with the first queen, or she's going to say, I'm out. Have the bees with her and swarms. So that's why you want to pinch off these other queen cells, is otherwise you could have her hatching and she decides she don't want to fight. She's going to leave. She's going to take part of your bees with you. So you kind of depleted part of the purpose. So, but that's a neat little slide that shows a little bit of everything. So you open up your hive and you see this stuff here. This is burr comb. Burr comb is basically comb that in a place that you do not want it. So let's start with this frame right here. What would you do if that was your frame that you pulled out of your hive? Okay. I see pull off and put in frame, scrape it off and brush off the bees. Yep. So what I would do is I would probably take my hive tool. I would scrape all this extra outside burr comb off, shake off the bees into the hive. And at that point, you got a couple choices. You can throw that comb away. You can throw it out and let the bees chew on it later on outside the hive. Or you can try to put that in another frame if you're short of comb somewhere else. You could wad it up and use it to rub on a nuke box or a trap or something, or maybe use it in a swarm trap. But definitely get it off and make them start making the comb correctly. Because this is going to be really hard. You can't hardly harvest it. It's just a pain in the butt. So this is one of the reasons you probably need to check your hives more often, especially a new colony, is to make sure that they understand how they're supposed to build that comb, do it correctly. This is probably the bee's fault. This picture up here is the producer's fault. He was feeding and left a voided space probably longer than he should. I would say by the looks of grass and everything out here, they probably have plenty of flowers out there that he probably left this feed out here by mistake and probably doesn't even need to be feeding at this point. So if they're bringing in this much comb stuff to build comb with, they've got plenty of stuff out there. I'd probably get rid of this whole box and put them back down to put a super on here instead of a feeder. So that is what we have for this week. Next week, if at all possible, try to be on. It's probably going to be the most important class we have out of the 6 weeks.